Welcome to Matt and the Macabre, a podcast about all things horror. Join us each week as we review another film, video game, story, or novel in the horror genre. Be warned, there will be major spoilers and harsh language. Listener discretion is advised.
What's up, guys? Welcome to Matt and the Macabre. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm Matt. I'll be your host, and we are here to talk about the wonderful world of the macabre. This will serve as just a brief intro for myself and what the show is going to be about. For me, it's pretty simple. I've been a horror fan my whole life. I grew up during horror's second golden age in the 80s and 90s, back when every year we would get either a new Friday the 13th or a Nightmare on Elm Street or a Halloween or a whole slew of others that didn't get as much attention for one reason or another. I mean, we had Goosebumps and Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark and Are You Afraid of the Dark and Tales from the Crypt. And let's not forget Joe Bob Briggs and Monster Vision, who Joe Bob Briggs is now making a comeback thanks to Shudder, which is arguably the best thing that they've done. And then at the tail end of the 90s, video games started catching up when franchises like Resident Evil and Silent Hill kicking off. It really was a golden age of horror, maybe the golden age of horror, in my opinion. And growing up during this time definitely shaped my taste in the horror genre. Now, this is, I want to be clear, this is not to say that I'm right and everyone else is wrong or my opinion's the only one that matters. I'm really just throwing this out there to kind of give you a baseline on what my personal tastes are and how I see things. And of course, as time goes on, we'll get more in depth with that. But my favorite horror franchise is Friday the 13th. It was my first one. Jason Lives is the first movie that I have a memory of watching when I was 4 or 5 years old. In fact, I'm positive that I'm wrong about this, but I like to think that without Friday the 13th, I wouldn't be here. Because one of my parents' earliest dates was seeing Friday the 13th Part 3 in 3D. But when I was growing up, we only had one TV, so I had a habit of waking up in the middle of the night and sneaking into the living room to flip through the TV channels. Because, when Dad was home, that was Dad's TV. And, all I did was act as the remote, and I had to walk uphill both ways through shag carpet to do it. Well, that's not true. Shag carpet was a little bit before my time. I've had to walk through it, but not in my house. I was flipping through the channels one night, and I came across it right at the beginning, just as lightning was striking the rod that Tommy stuck into Jason, and there's that big explosion, and the camera cuts to Jason's eye opening, and I was immediately scared out of my mind. But I could not turn away, and I sat and watched the entire thing, and that was my introduction to horror. So I've got a big soft spot for slashers like Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween, Child's Play, Sleepaway Camp, stuff like that. And now that I'm older, though, I find that more often than not, I am sorely disappointed with the new horror movies that come out. I am not a fan of Hereditary, for example. I don't understand all the love. I found it to be kind of boring, kind of cliche. Midsummer is another one that I don't get the love for. I've seen The Wicker Man. I mean, it did have some cool imagery like the Blood Eagle, but I saw everything coming a mile away. There was no suspense, no surprises. I just did not enjoy it. I did, however, have a great time with Sinister when it came out. Now, the sequel is a piece of hot garbage that should be avoided at all costs, but the first one is a good, genuine, suspenseful horror film, in my opinion. The Witch is another one, more recent, that I enjoyed. I saw In a Violent Nature recently, and I actually thought it was pretty fun. Not a great film, and definitely not this new pinnacle of innovation for slasher films that some people were trying to make it out to be, but it was definitely well made, and it was definitely a lot of fun. It's worth your time. And again, this is not to make me sound, I don't know, holier than thou is not really the right phrase, but I don't want to sound like I think that I'm right, everybody else is wrong, and that's the end of it. Again, I'm just trying to give you a baseline, a basic understanding of what my tastes are, so you can have a little bit of an idea of what to expect as things move forward, and we start going through these different films and franchises and whatnot. On that note, the format of the show is going to be pretty simple. The idea for this actually came from me annoying my family. Every year in October, for years, I've made it a point to show the kids some movies that I grew up with. Sometimes they're scary, sometimes they're not. For example, our favorite one that we always start with on October 1st is Ernest Scared Stupid, which, in my opinion, is a perfect gateway movie if you have young kids who are interested in horror stuff, because, of course, Jim Varney as Ernest P. Worrell is unparalleled. And the slapstick, the genuine goofiness, and the stupidity is always hilarious. But it's also genuinely got some good atmosphere, and at least for a younger audience, a couple of decent scares. So if you do have younger children and are looking for a scary type movie that's still safe, that you can watch with them, I cannot recommend Ernest Scared Stupid highly enough. We love it. You will too. But we watched some of the classics like Friday the 13th. This year we were on a Nightmare on Elm Street kick. I've shown them Halloween. We've watched, Sinister, Smile, some newer movies. Smile's another one I don't get the love for. In my opinion, it was about 20 minutes longer than it needed to be, and it was a borderline ripoff of It Follows. We just watched Smile 2, and I thought it was just more of the same. Some cool imagery here and there, but not really worth your time. But I digress. Of course, I always watch the newer movies first, because as much as I want my kids to have experiences with these types of movies like I did, I want their journey to be a little more guarded than mine was. Okay, I was pretty much just set free. Now, don't get me wrong, I knew the difference between what was real and what was make-believe, but what I was consuming was not very closely monitored. And nowadays, let's face it, you just can't do that anymore. But to get back to my point, when we sit down to watch these movies, especially ones I grew up with, like Ernest Scared Stupid or Friday the 13th, I've got a terrible habit of pausing the movie every 5 or 10 minutes to make some kind of comment or point something out or ask, did you understand this? Did you catch that? Stuff like that. I'm absolutely one of those guys, and I just cannot help myself. And it was actually my kids who suggested, Dad, you should just do a podcast about all this stuff. And so an idea was born, and here I sit. So every episode, we will look at a movie and go through the entire plot line. We'll go through the whole movie from start to finish. We'll talk about specific scenes or things in the background, or if there's a bit of trivia or something like that I want to bring up and talk about, that'll be the basic idea. But it won't just be exclusive to movies. We'll also get around to some video games, throw in a couple of books or short stories or something like that. In fact, one that I know we'll get into before too long is The Wendigo by Algernon Blackwood for 2 reasons. Number one, in Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, The Wendigo is my favorite story. It was when I was a kid. It still is as an adult. And that original story by Algernon Blackwood is the one that was kiddified, so to speak, by Alvin Schwartz for that collection. But more importantly, it's the first story I've read in a long, long time, especially as an adult, that left me feeling uneasy when I put it down. It's very hard to get that kind of reaction out of me, but it did. And so anytime I get the opportunity, I always recommend it. So we'll definitely get into that at some point. But for now, that pretty much wraps it up. I really just wanted to introduce myself, introduce the show, what we're going to be about, what we're going to be doing. And just because it is so near and dear to my heart, it's where all things horror started for me. And we are blessed to have a Friday the 13th this month. We're going to kick off with the Friday the 13th franchise next Friday, December 13th, beginning with the original film released in 1980, all the way through the 2009 remake, which I'll go and spoil my thoughts a little bit. I am not a fan of. I know some people, it's their favorite one in the series, and they're certainly entitled to that opinion, but it is not one that I share. But we'll get there when we get there. For now, we're going to call it a night, and I will see you guys next time for our official kickoff on Friday the 13th. And until then, you kids keep your noses clean, understand? We ain't going to stand for no weirdness out here.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Mad and the Macabre. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Join us next episode as we take a look at another piece of the wonderful world of horror. Mad and the Macabre is not affiliated with, and this podcast has not been prepared, approved, or licensed by any entity that created the media analyzed herein. Music is a Horrid Discovery by Ayla Scott, licensed under a Creative Commons license. If you enjoyed the show, support us by leaving a review wherever you get your podcasts, and join us over at patreon.com/Matt and the Macabre for exclusive content. We'll see you next time.